Hello, my name is Sankap Ngamgetsap, and for this session, we are going to go over the additional columns that we added to the accounting schedule. Those are the gross asset value, accumulated accumulated amortization, and impairment reserve. This is the change made in 10.6.1 application release. The agenda for this session. We are going to talk about the changes that we made to accounting schedule, the calculations of gross asset value, the calculation of the accumulative amortization value in the various scenarios, the calculation of impairment reserve, and we're going to do some demo to go over different scenarios, the patchover workflow related to this change, and reference material. So for the changes to the accounting schedule, there are 6 new fields added to the TRI fiscal line item BO under TRI cost item module. Those are TRI gross asset value NU, TRI accumulated amortization NU, TRI impairment reserve NU, and its corresponding base field. The total of 6. The gross asset value and accumulative amortization columns are now added to the operating or finance schedule for both accounting and local reporting tabs. The other change that we made is relabel the asset value column on the operating finance schedule to the net asset value. So for the calculations of the gross asset value in various scenarios, when you do a new lease activation or the lease adoption, the gross asset value will be equal to the initial right-of-use asset, like the current asset value of the amortization summary section. When you do an index adjustment for GAAP, there's no change. The amount of the gross asset stays the same. But if you do the index adjustment for the IFRS, it is treated as a modification. So the gross asset value is also updated using this calculation, previous gross asset plus the change in liability, which is the new liability minus the previous liability. And for the impairment for GAAP, the gross asset value is also updated to the new FMV, which is the new right-of-use asset. For the impairment of the IFRS, no change. The gross asset stays the same. For modification that it could cause the proportionate, like the example of partial termination or reduce in term when it's IFRS. The gross asset value is updated to be the previous gross asset value plus the previous net asset value times the % change in liability. Other type of modifications like extension, expansion, or reasonably certain, like anything else above, like besides what we talked already, the gross asset value will be equal to the previous gross asset value plus the change in liability, which is the new liability minus the previous liability. Now we'll go over the calculations of the accumulated amortization in various scenarios. So for new activation or the lease adoption, the accumulated amortization value of the amortization column. For the index adjustment of the GAAP, there's no change. The cumulative amortization stays the same. We don't even calculate the accounting schedule for GAAP in this case. For the index adjustment of the IFRS, again, it is treated as a modification. Therefore, the accumulated accumulated amortization will also be updated. It's going to be cumulative amortization of the cumulative of amortization column, but it will continue from the previous period before the modification happened, basically. For the impairment of the gap, this is a special case. The accumulative amortization column, it is going to be reset. Um, it will start from zero again when you do an impairment for gap. For the impairment of the IFRS, it is going to be um, just the cumulative of the amortization and continue from the previous period, which is before the modification happened. And the rest, the same calculation goes to the other type of modification like proportionate, like partial termination or reduce in lease term for IFRS, and for the extension or expansion, those are the same, which is continue from the previous period prior to the modification. The calculation of the impairment reserve, it will be equal to the new FMV minus the current right of use asset. There are a couple notes here. First is that this view will be populated only when the lease is impaired and only for the IFRS. By default, the view is not visible on the operating or finance schedule. If you would like to have the view visible on the accounting schedules, you can have this view added to the query. If the same lease is impaired multiple times, the impairment reserve will keep accumulated. So I'm gonna go over to TRIRIGA and we're gonna show some example um, for lease activation, lease adoption, index adjustment, um, multiple type of modification like impairment, partial termination in case of the proportionate and extension. So I'm going to TRIRIGA. So in this environment, I already have those 6 examples created. So first one is for the new lease activation. So I have this set up. My both GAAP adoption and IFRS adoption are set to January 1st of 2019. So my commencement date is 1/1/2019 and expiration dates for this lease is 12/31/2020, only 2 years. The payments are there for 2 years as well. Increase every anniversary for $5,000. So I will go to the accounting tab. So my accounting start and end also set to the same 1/1/19 and 12/31/2020. I'm gonna go over to the operating GAAP schedule here. So if I scroll to the right here, which is my gross asset value. So the gross asset value for the new lease activation, like I mentioned in the in the PowerPoint, it's gonna be equal to the initial right of use asset, which is the same as in your current asset value in the schedule summary here. So it will be equal to that field here. And the accumulated amortization is just the cumulative of the amortization column. So we'll start from 11,798 and then plus this 11,821 to be equal to this, and then it will go over like that until the end of the lease term. Have the impairment reserve. The impairment reserve is only gonna be calculated and populated when it is in impairment case for IFRS alone. So in this case, it's not there. I'm going to the local reporting tab for finance schedule. So the gross asset also gonna be equal to the initial right of use asset, which is 2,900, $290,000 here. And then a cumulative amortization is going to be the same, which is the cumulative of the amortization column. And then it will just, sum up at the end. So that is there for the new lease activation. The next example is going to be the lease adoption. So my lease, like I said earlier, that adoption for both GAAP and IFRS are January of 2019. So my commencement is 2017, and then in 2020, payment is there for 4 years, increase $500 every year. And this lease, I already did the adoption. So my accounting start is, it was from 2017, but now I did the adoption. So now my operating schedule is showing from 2019-01 for 2 years only. So this is now going to be my current asset value, which is the initial right of use asset of the GAAP 842. So if I scroll to the right of the schedule here, my gross asset value, like I said, it's going to be equal to the initial right of use asset, which is this view. So it's 226,985. And a cumulative amortization also is going to be cumulative of this amortization column. Same goes with the local reporting. So my local reporting right of use asset is 226. So now if I scroll to the gross asset value, it's going to be 226 for all the period. And then for accumulated amortization column, it will be like that too. Start at 9,457 and then, keep accumulated until the end of the lease term. Also in this case, it's just the lease adoption. There's no impairment reserve populated, so we're not gonna talk about it here. The next example is the impairment. Oh no, let me go to index adjustment first. Index adjustment. So for index adjustment, I have just the 2 years lease. My index adjustment just for the second year, which is 2020 only. I only do the adjustment for 1 year. No minimum and no maximum set. And I already issue an index adjustment calculator. So if I go to that record here, just to show you that I issue 10%. So my payment line item, it was from 15,000 for the second year. It is now 10% more, which is 16,500. So now if I go to the accounting tab after the index adjustment for GAAP, there is no change. If I go to the gross asset value, this is gonna be the same amount. If I compare this in the history record, 290 is what it said in the history as well. This is the history record of the GAAP before I did the index adjustment. So this is also 290. There's no change. Like I said, for GAAP, there's no change when you do index adjustment alone. So that's no change. The gross assets stay the same. The accumulative amortization, there's no change. On the local reporting is different because it's for IFRS, it's going to be treated as a modification. So for local reporting, the current asset value is updated. So now the gross asset value at the period of 2000 2020-01 here, which is the highlighted um, line. If I go over here, so you see it's no longer 290. It's now up to $308,000, which is the previous gross asset value plus the change in liability. And the cumulative amortization is also now updated because of the amortization is changed. So just using the previous um, cumulative amortization, which is this one, 145, plus the um, amortization column forward. So this for impairment, for index adjustment, there's different between GAAP and IFRS. GAAP, there's no change. IFRS, there's a change. Next is the impairment scenario. It's the same scenario, 2-year lease from 1/1/19, and my payment is 10,000 and then 15,000 the second year. And then what I did is I did a modification on October of 2019 period to change to update my current asset value to be 150,000, which is lower than my current asset value at that period. So if I look at this, you see the highlighted period here. So if I scroll over to the gross asset value column, you see that my gross asset value is now updated to the new asset value, which is the new FMV itself. 150 is no longer 290 anymore. And then on the cumulative amortization column, it will reset to be 0 and start over from there. You see it's 0 and then, 10,714 and then keep going from there. So at the end, it will equal to now the new asset value, which is 150. For the IFRS is different. So if I mark the same period, 2019-10, where I did the modification, for the gross asset value, you see there's no change. It stays the same as is. There's no change at all. For the cumulative amortization, there is the change because of the amortization getting lower. So now it's just the previous cumulative amortization, which is 109,044 plus the new one moving forward like that. Just keep going. So there's no change for the gross asset, but there's some change on accumulative amortization because of the amortization is recalculated. For impairment between GAAP and IFRS, they are different. So now I'm gonna go to the next, which is the partial termination. So it's the same example, 1/1/19 to 12/31/2020. In this case, I set the location. At first, I set it to be 3,000 square feet, and then I terminate 1,000 square feet basically. So my payment was reduced. I only reduced this payment from, let me see, my history. My payment was reduced from 15,000 to 11,000 because I shaded 1,000. And also in the same period, which is October 2019. I'm going to mark that here. So the result of that is going to do the proportionate, like how I said earlier, calculation for the gross asset. So the amount is also updated here. Is no longer 290. you can check out the calculation or like the formula in the PowerPoint. And the accumulated amortization, it just carry forward from whatever um, prior to the modification and keep going. The same goes to the local reporting. So if I mark 2019-10, the gross asset value is different than the previous period prior to modification. And also the cumulative amortization is just keep continuing from the prior period. And then the last example, which would be the extension case. So my history, I only have the lease in 2020 and my payment also in 2020. And then when I did a modification at the same period, which is October 2019, I added 2 more years to it. I added 2 years of the payment line item, 2 years of the payments as well. So if I go to the accounting scheduled, mark 2019-10 period, scroll over to the gross asset, you see that the gross asset is now increased to 795, which is in the change in liability past the previous gross. So you update it to 795. And now the cumulative amortization is also updated because of my amortization is gonna go up too. So it just keep continue from prior modification and then just keep going till the end of until the new of the lease term. The same goes with the local reporting. If I go to 2019-10 here, the gross asset, you see that the gross asset also increased, and then the accumulated amortizations also continue from the prior modification period, and the amortization also updated. That is the example that I would like to show. I'm going back to PowerPoint. Next is the patch over. So the only patch over we created for this change is to update the gross asset, accumulative accumulated amortization, and impairment reserve views for all the history leases. Oh, I forgot to, before that, I just gonna go back to the impairment. I haven't shown you the impairment reserve view for impairment case. Let me show you that. So go back to impairment, I'm sorry, for the IFRS alone, because I said the impairment reserve is only going to be populated for the impairment case of the IFRS. So for local reporting right now is IFRS for me. So if I go over to the 10/1/2019 and forward, I will have the impairment reserve set of negative 19,562, which is the new FMV minus the right use asset at that period. So to loss here, you see that amount, it's going to be the same. So that will be populated from the modification period, which is 2019 or 10, which is 2019-10 until the end of the period. So all those periods will have the impairment reserve. And as I said earlier, that if you have impair the lease multiple times, this fee will be accumulated. Okay, so now back again to the PowerPoint to go over the patchover workflow. So there's only one patchover, like I said earlier. Um, this patchover is to update the gross asset, the accumulated amortization, and impairment reserve fees for all the history leases of the current leases that are in active review in progress, routing in progress, revision in progress, and revision accounting in review. For the current leases that are inactive, review in progress, and routing in progress, those fields will be updated on the current leases as well. For the current leases that are in revision in progress and revision accounting review, the user will need to click on the recalculate accounting schedule themselves to have the fields updated. Just a couple notes. This patchover may take a long time. So if you choose to filter for a set of leases, you can just go to this query. And also, before you trigger this patchover, please inform user that they should not revise their leases or do anything with their existing leases until the updates are completed. For this patchover, even though it's set 10.6.0.4, if you and your system hasn't yet upgraded to 10.6.0.4 fixed pack release, if you only upgraded to 10.6.1, the main patchover of 10.6.1 will automatically trigger this 10.6.0.4 as well. So don't worry about it. The only reference material that I have is this TRIRIGA 10.6.1 release notes referencing APAR IJ17161. Thank you for listening and you have a wonderful day.